read about him in Genesis. Well, the first sort of significant interaction involving Lot is in chapter 13. We know if you go back to the end of chapter 11, chapter 12, Lot was with Abram when Abram was called and left his homeland and ended up in the land of Canaan, and Lot, Abram's nephew, was with him. But our study questions begin to ask us concerning that episode in chapter 13, where there was a dissension between the herdsman of Lot and the herdsman of Abram. Verse 7. Genesis 13, verse 7. There was a strife between the herdsman of Abram's cattle and the herdsman of Lot's cattle, and the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelled in the land. Now, what provoked this was that both Abraham and Lot were very prosperous. Verse 2, back up to verse 2, Abram was very rich in cattle and silver and gold. And if you look at verse 5, Lot also, which went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents. And so, the contention resulted over the fact that they are being very prosperous. Things are going well for both Abram and Lot. And so their herds are increasing and multiplying to the point that there's a little bit of competition here for good pasture land and probably for water. If you're going to keep increasing your herds, you got to have a good place for them to graze, and you got to have enough water for them. And if the herds of both men are large, there's going to be a competition for the best land. And so Abram and Lot apparently weren't at each other, but their herdsmen were. They were contending with one another. And verse 8, we talked about this last week. Abram said unto Lot, let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdsman and thy herdsman, for we be brethren. And I know that we commented on this last week, but I think that's just such an encouraging expression and sort of ought to be kept in mind by all of us. From time to time, we're gonna come upon situations where there's a little rough water. Things not going just perfectly smoothly. That happens. We understand that happens. But an overarching attitude that we ought to have is we be brethren. And if we keep in mind that we be brethren, first of all, if we're devoted to the Lord and we're devoted to one another as brethren, we should be able to work it out. We're not compromising truth or righteousness, but this wasn't about truth or righteousness here. This was a material thing. It involved the material prosperity of these two men. But Abram had this very noble attitude. We be brethren. There shouldn't be contention between us. We be brethren. And so then he made the very gracious offer. Verse 9, is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou depart to the right, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere before the Lord had destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like unto the land of Egypt, as thou comest unto Zoar. Now, I don't know what Egypt is like as you come to Zoar, but I think we have a very high imagination of what the garden of the Lord looked like. I assume he's talking about the Garden of Eden and how perfect and wonderful it was. You get the picture. This was ideal. I mean, I read something a while back that there's been a very drastic shift in climate over. When I see the pictures today from Israel, the land of Israel, this Canaan land today, a lot of it looks very dry and arid, almost desert-like. I mean, it doesn't look like a beautiful place. It certainly doesn't look like a kind of place where you would prosper in agriculture with herds and flocks and growing crops. But I read somewhere recently that there's been a documented climate change in that region, that it is a lot more dry and arid there than it used to be. And historically, they're able to verify that. So that seems to be the case here. It was near perfect in this plains of Jordan that Lot saw. Now, as we talked about last week, I really am hung up on the idea that if Lot had been the kind of person that he should have been, he should have humbly said, listen, you're my elder, you're my uncle, you've taken over the role of father to me. I am not choosing. That's your call. You choose, and I'll take what you don't want. And I think all of us that just seems what would have been right. That would have been proper, and he didn't do that. And you have to, verse 11. Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan. I know the word selfish, self-interest, that sort of description has been applied to Lot, and I think that I would have to agree with that assessment. It wasn't the gracious, magnanimous, you choose. It's your place to choose. You're the elder member here. You choose which way we will go. But he took it on himself. He could argue, Abraham gave me the option. Well, who am I to argue with Abraham? He said I could choose, so I just chose. What's wrong with that? I still think that it would have been appropriate for him to put that choice on Abraham. Monty.
Lot's attitude should have been like Abraham's was when Abraham was trying to buy the field and the cave to bury Sarah in. He went and met with the people, the elders of the city, and the guy that owned the land, and told him, give him their condolence.
You can have it.
And he says, if you'll help me, he said, I need to buy this plot of land for a burial place. And the guy said, you can have it. And Abraham said, no, I'm going to buy it. And the guy said, it's worth so much. What's that between me and you? Apparently they were friends, and both of them filthy rich, and that amount of money that piece was worth wasn't going to make or break either of them. But Abraham, when the guy made that price, he didn't argue about it. He paid the price. And that's how Lot should have been here. When Abraham said, you choose, he should have said no. And there might have been some debate back and forth, but ultimately he should have said, look, you're the senior member, I'm not going to choose. Because Abraham, we can see in his life, made that same example later, that he done what was the right thing, even though when the guy said you can have it, it don't matter. He didn't say, oh, okay, thank you, and he took off.
Yeah, I think you're right. Tina?
This is just speculation, but do you think Abraham knew that God would take care of him, that God would provide? And so it wasn't...
Well, I don't think that's just speculative. I mean, he demonstrates that confidence. I mean, the fact that he left his homeland to go to a place he never even knew of showed his confidence in God, that if he lived right and did right, God would bless him. And so he has that kind of faith, and he also has that kind of experience. He's already experienced that sort of thing. All right. Yes.
We can learn a good lesson from Lot, especially the young people. I'm past that age now, but we have a good job offer. I can make 3 times what I'm making, here. But consider where you're moving to. Is there a church there? A lot of people don't make it. They don't consider, the things.
Is there a church there? What kind of environment would my kids be in?
Lot, he was looking at the dollar.
He was. Because if you look down there, at still in that same context, at verse 13, when Lot made that decision, notice verse 12, Abraham dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain and pitched his tent towards Sodom. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. We made this comment last week, but the reputation of Sodom was already known when Lot made this call. So I think it was a selfish call. I think it was based exclusively on the prospect of making more money, prospering materialistically. It wasn't right toward Abraham, and it wasn't the right decision for his own spiritual well-being and that of his family. And that's going to bear out. We know that's going to bear out. He's going to end up losing everything. He's going to lose all of his material prosperity. He's going to lose his family. It was a bad decision. And so I know I've got a sermon on this. You've probably heard plenty of preachers preach sermons on, I think my sermon is entitled, How to Make a Bad Decision. Lot made a bad decision here. And we see what was behind it. JD.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, he continues to make a lot of those. But to further contrast, Abraham and Lot, the thing about Abraham, God tells him to go somewhere, and he doesn't have any idea where it is, and he says, okay, I'll go. Lot, God basically tells him, I'm going to destroy the city, and I'm going to save you alive, but you need to leave.
And he don't want to leave.
Delaying, and then even when he finally does, well, I can't flee. Can't you spare one city for me to go to?
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't make it in the mountains or whatever.
Yeah, there's a big contrast between Abraham and Lot. That is for sure. All right, so let's skip over to chapter 19. And we see another really unusual thing that we have to spend a little bit of time talking about. So remember, in chapter 18, 2 messengers from God come to Abraham, tell him what's about to transpire. I've always thought it's kind of interesting there at the end of chapter 18. Abraham tries to negotiate with God. What if there were 50 righteous people in Sodom? Would you spare the city for 50 righteous people? Yeah, we'd spare it for. Well, what if there were 40? Okay, we'd spare the city if there were 40. How about 30? Okay, 30. How about 20? How about 10? He gets God all the way down to 10, and God said, yeah, I would spare Sodom if there were 10 righteous people in the city. And there weren't, of course. But at the end of that, you get the idea that, God said, okay, 10, but I'm done talking about it. But there weren't 10 righteous people in Sodom. So those 2 angels that had given Abraham a heads up about what's coming, they went on to Sodom. Chapter 19, verse 1, and there came 2 angels to Sodom at even, and Lot sat in the gate of Sodom, and Lot, seeing them, rose to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. Now, something that you have to point out here. Remember, initially Lot pitched his tent towards Sodom. In chapter 14, Lot's living in Sodom because when there's a war, he is one of the people taken captive from Sodom, he and his family. Now in chapter 19, he's actually sitting in the gate of the city. He has come all the way around now. He chose the well-watered plain. He pitched his tent toward Sodom. He lived in Sodom. He's now sitting among those who, you get the idea in those times that was sort of a thing, that the elders of the city or the prominent men of the city sat in the gate of the city and sort of passed the time of day and also passed judgment on various things. And so he's sitting in the gate of the city. He rose to meet these 2. He bowed himself with his face toward the ground. He said, behold now, my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house and tarry all night and wash your feet, and ye shall rise up early and go on your ways. And they said, nay, but we will abide in the street all night. And he pressed upon them greatly, and they turned in unto him and entered into his house, and he made them a feast and did bake unleavened bread, and they did eat. Now, our author in our study guide mentions, Hebrews 13 verse 2 talks about some who entertained angels unawares. And many people think that Hebrews 13:2, it stresses hospitality, entertaining angels unaware, that it may be a reference, in fact, to Lot in here. And it may well be. I've wondered, what do you think? I've wondered if the reason that Lot really insisted that these men, or the angels, we know they were angels, but the reason he wanted them to come to his house is because he knew the reputation of the men of Sodom. And he knew very likely what would happen if they spent the night in the open square. And he's trying to protect them from the evil he knows exists in that city. He is full aware of what's going on in Sodom and how bad Sodom is. Look at 2 Peter 2. In 2 Peter, let me get my page turned here. Come on. 2 Peter 2, verse 7. God delivered just Lot, vexed with the filthy conversation or filthy manner of life of the wicked. For that righteous man dwelling among them and seeing and hearing vexed his righteous soul from day to day with their unlawful deeds. So Lot was full aware of the kind of place Sodom was. And so he's got to be acting now in concern for the safety of these two angels, these two men, these two angels who come. But another thing that you ought to say about Lot is he pitched his tent toward Sodom. He moved into Sodom. He's sitting in the gate of the city of Sodom. Point 4, why didn't he leave? He knew what was going on. Why did he stay? Just a succession of bad decisions. Monty?
We know that he knew what was likely to happen because in verse 8, when the people have come and they're saying, send these guys out to us, and he said, do not do nothing to these men since this is the reason they've come under the shadow of my roof. He invited them in to shelter them and to try to protect them from being in the city because he knew how they were.
Exactly. So, verse 4, before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round, both old and young, all people from every quarter. And they called unto Lot and said to him, where are the men which came into thee this night? Bring them out to us that we may know them. Now, understand that expression, right? We know that biblical expression, to know them, is what we would refer to as carnal knowledge, right? They wanted to have intimate knowledge of these men. And Lot went out the door unto them and shut the door after them and said, I pray you, brethren, do not so wickedly. Notice, Lot understood that when they wanted to know these men, that it was a wicked thing. They weren't saying, well, you got some, we'd just like to meet these guys. We'd just like to make their acquaintance. We'd like to know them. We'd like to know where they're from, what their family. No, that's not what it means. To know them means to have intimate knowledge, carnal knowledge of these men. And Lot understood that their intentions were wicked. Verse 8 is the big question mark. Behold, now I have 2 daughters which have not known man. Let me, I pray you, bring them out unto you, and do ye to them as is good in your eyes. Only unto these men do nothing, for therefore came they under the shadow of my roof. No, as Monty rightly observed, he had brought them into his house because he intended to protect them. But the big question, and this just always comes up, what about Lot offering his virgin daughters to these horribly perverted, wicked men? How do you explain that? Anybody want to take a shot at that? I don't know.
It's wrong, obviously. That offer was not the right thing to do. In that day and time, somebody's being a guest to someone, you're going to protect them at all costs.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that doesn't mean you give your daughters to some horrible men to be abused by them, right? That's not what you would do. So there's other ways out than offering this.
Yes.
It's the wrong thing for him to do. We had another scenario back in Judges where a very similar thing happened with Levi and his concubine.
Yeah.
And that was the Jewish people did at that time, not even Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah.
That's how bad they got. But he did say similar thing, a horrible thing had happened.
Yeah.
It's
You
just
know,
a bad decision on that. That's what to live in a place like that. You kind of,
why didn't he leave? I want to know why he didn't leave. That's the big question. But I'm afraid that sometimes people feel like they're duty bound to defend Lot in this. I'm not defending him in this. First of all, Lot's already made a lot of bad decisions. There's no reason to think this is not just another bad decision in a long chain of bad decisions. I've heard the argument made that the obligation of hospitality was so great, and Lot is to be commended because he's being hospitable to these men at this extreme level. I don't buy that. Personally, I don't buy that. The best I can come up with is that he offers his daughters in an attempt to shame the men, to show just how horrible what they're asking is, and that maybe, just possibly, his thought is they won't take me up on this, because they're not interested in women anyway. They're interested in men. But maybe I think I think the best turn you can put on this is that Lot was just trying to shame them into backing down. JD?
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah. Sarah?
Well, not just, I wasn't thinking necessarily to shame them, but more that if I offer them something that they absolutely, I know they don't want,
Yeah.
but I still kind of look good if I try to
Yeah.
tease them.
Yeah, I don't.
The example in the Old Testament, those are similar men, and they did horrible things to that concubine too. So if he knew his history of the Jewish the Old Testament, he knew there was a possibility that bad things could happen. I mean, it's it's not a good way to life.
I mean, even if you put the best slant on it, it doesn't look good for Lot. I mean, it just doesn't look good. But again, I don't feel duty bound to defend him in this. I mean, he's already done a lot of stuff that just off the chart stupid. And I just don't feel obligation to defend him. Kelly, did you have?
I was going to say kind of the same thing, but you think he was maybe trying to choose the lesser of the two evils, that one sin is just so gross.
Yeah, so I don't know. I don't even know if I could judge that as a lesser of two evils. But, you know, even at that is bad. That would be a bad call even at that. JD?
What's always puzzled me so much about Lot is you know, even the passage in 2 Peter you mentioned, you know, talks about him being righteous. I mean, from a lot of the stuff that he did, it seems like he still, at some level, tried to do what was right, wanted to do what was right, but he wanted to put himself in every terrible position. Of course, his family, probably more so than himself, paid for his decisions in doing that. But you think of, like, a lot of people who do that, well, I get on the outskirts of it, now I'm in it. A lot of those people just end up completely giving themselves over to almost being as bad as the people they're with.
Yeah.
But the crazy thing it's always seemed to me about Lot is he somehow internally still seemed to want to do what was right. Yet
And Peter, there in 2 Peter, he's called righteous.
Yeah.
He's called a righteous man. So he had not, at least to his credit, he had not personally converted to these perversions, that he wasn't involved in that wickedness. Clayton?
Makes his decision about staying there and being there even more puzzling than if he had, you know, gone over and become very evil like they were.
Yeah. Clayton?
I understand verse 8 says they're virgins, and 14 says he has sons-in-law. So I just didn't understand.
Yeah, so Clayton's asking, in verse 8, he talks about he has two daughters which have not known man. But down in 14, Lot went out and spake to his son-in-laws which had married his daughters. Couple possible explanations. He had more daughters than those two virgin daughters. That's easy. Or another alternate explanation I've read is that they were betrothed. They were engaged to be married to these men. Either one works, I guess. New American Standard actually says who were to be married to. Yeah. Okay. That is so puzzling, and I don't know a better answer to what Lot did there. So it goes on. I'm still in chapter 19. If you're looking at your study guide, skip down to question 9. So we talked about how he offered his daughters to protect the guests, maybe. Let's read verse 12. I'm in chapter 19, verse 12. The men said to Lot, you know, by the way, how bad are the men in Sodom? So when Lot makes that outrageous offer of his daughters, verse 9, they say, stand back. And said again, this one fellow came in to sojourn, and he will needs be a judge. Now will we deal worse with thee than with them. And they pressed sore upon the man, even Lot, and came near to break the door. But the men put forth, that is these angels, put forth their hand and pulled Lot into the house to them and shut the door. And they smote the men that were at the door of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves to find the door. That has got to be one of the most shocking expressions in this whole story. They've been struck blind. They're still trying to get at these men. They're still trying to find their way through the door to get into these men. I mean, you talk about completely given over to their wicked perversions. They surely were. And so these angels, these men who are, we know angels, the men said to Lot, Hast thou here any besides son-in-law, and thy sons and thy daughters, whatsoever thou hast in the city, bring them out of this place. For we will destroy this place, because the cry of them is waxen great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord hath sent us to destroy it. And Lot went out and spake to his sons-in-law, which married his daughters, and said, Get up, get you out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city. But he seemed as one that mocked unto his sons-in-law. And so those sons-in-law, be it already married to some other daughters of Lot, or engaged to be married to his two youngest daughters, whatever, they were not. Lot is crazy. That guy is crazy. I don't tell you about Lot. He's crazy. Can you believe what he's saying? They mocked at what he was saying. When the morning arose, the angels hastened Lot, saying, Arise, take thy wife and thy two daughters that are here, lest thou... I've always wondered about that, by the way, in the King James expression. Arise and take thy wife and thy two daughters, which are here. Again, maybe hinting that he had other daughters besides these two. But anyway, lest thou be consumed in the iniquity of the city. And while he lingered, now this goes to the point that J.D. was making earlier. Abram was up and away. Abraham was ready to go at God's command. Lot, on the other hand, drug his feet. And while he lingered, the men laid hold on his hand, and upon the hand of his wife, upon the hand of his two daughters, the Lord being merciful unto him, and they brought him forth and set him without the city. And it came to pass, when they had brought them forth abroad, that he said, Escape for thy life, look not behind thee, neither stay thou in the plain, escape to the mountain, lest thou be consumed. And Lot said to them, O not so, my Lord. Behold, now thy servant hath found grace in thy sight, and thou hast magnified thy mercy, which thou hast showed unto me in saving my life. And I cannot escape to the mountain, lest some evil take me and I die. Behold, now this city is near to flee unto, and it's a little one. O let me escape thither. Is it not a little one? And my soul shall live. And he said unto him, See, I have accepted thee concerning this thing also, that I will not overthrow this city for which thou hast spoken. Haste thee, escape thither, for I cannot do anything till thou be come thither. Therefore the name of the city was called Zoar. All of this to what J.D. was mentioning earlier, instead of just quickly complying with what he's been told to do, and there's all indication that this is exactly what's about to happen, is exactly what these angelic messengers are telling him is about to happen, and yet he's quibbling about complying with their instructions. Oh, I can't go to the mountains. Something bad might happen to me in the mountains. Let me go to this little city. And they actually agreed that he could go to this city, the little city, which was called Zoar. Again, you just don't have the great impression of Lot as a exemplary character of faith. A lot of Old Testament characters we hold up as real examples, imitatable examples of great faith. Lot's not in that category. You don't think, when you think about the faith of Abraham, when you think about the faith of Noah, when you think about the faith of Moses, all those characters mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11, when you think about the prophets like Elijah and Jeremiah, Daniel, when you think about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you never think about naming Lot in conjunction with them as far as great people of great faith. He just was missing it. He was just off. Kelly?
I got a question. Verse 12, the angels asked him, Who else do you have here? Family, sons, daughters, whoever you have in the city. But they had already gone through the whole process of saying, Who's righteous in the city?
Yeah.
So are they implying that if you have family, whether righteous or not righteous, they can come along?
I don't know. I never really thought about it. I guess my first inclination would be to just say, get everything that you get all of your loved ones together. And they did, they're actually asking, you have to believe they would know that, but they're actually asking, do you have any others? If you have others, you better bring them too. So I think that's more the gist of it. I don't know that we could conclude that they would even save wicked people from the destruction. In other words, if he's got some sons, but his sons are homosexuals with all the other men of Sodom, if Lot had brought them out, would they have been spared? I don't know. I just don't know. I think they're calling upon Lot to judge, to make a decision, make a call. Let's get out of here. Get who you can and let's go. But you have to believe, being angelic beings, they would have known the answer to the questions they asked him. I think they're putting it to him to make him decide who to take, who could go. So verse 23, the sun was risen upon the earth when Lot entered into Zoar. Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities and that which grew upon the ground. But his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. So the promised destruction comes. Boy, this is interesting. Just one specific here about how you go. When you go, don't look back. Lot's wife looked back. Of course, there's been all kinds of speculation about why she would look back. It doesn't say. And any answer that we would give to that question would be a speculation on our part. You have to, you would have to agree that she's left behind all of her material prosperity, right? All of her material prosperity is back there in the city. Maybe other family members, possibly, quite possibly, other family members, but all the people she knew, all home, that's home back there, or just pure curiosity. I want to see what's happening back there. All of those kind of things could have factored in. We don't know. She looked back, but she was told not to look back. I think a lot of people would argue that's a little thing, isn't it? Isn't that just a little thing to look back? It seems like it's even natural that you'd want to look back. She turned into a pillar of salt. So, to all of those who think that God doesn't mean what he says and that it's really not important to do what God says to do, remember, our Lord Jesus said, remember Lot's wife. Remember, get a lesson from this. When you do what you're told not to do, there's going to be a punishment that follows. Remember Lot's wife. Anybody else thought or comment? All right, so she turns into a pillar of salt. And now the Dead Sea is a salt sea. Have you ever heard anybody make this point? So, the Dead Sea is, I think, probably holds the reputation of being the saltiest water, surface water on planet Earth. Salt Lake City is a salt lake, but the Dead Sea is like, almost unimaginably salty. So that's where the salt came from. Lot's wife. She turned into a pillar of salt, and that's where the salt in the Dead Sea came from. That's why the Dead Sea is a Dead Sea. That's why it's a salt sea. What do you think about that? Monty?
I think, if you make the assumption that her physical form, however tall or wide or whatever she was, that's how big this pillar of salt was, wouldn't be a drop in the bucket compared to the volume of water in the Dead Sea.
That's right.
You would notice it. The Dead Sea is a salt sea for other geological reasons, or maybe because God, for whatever reason, caused it to be that way as a punishment to somebody or another. But nevertheless, the volume that she would have been of salt, and she would make the river salty for 5 minutes at best.
That's exactly right. I think that's just, one of the things we got to be careful about is making flaky arguments that make people think we're nuts. In my opinion, that's the kind of a flaky argument that some Christians make, and then people say, those Christians are just mindless people. They don't use their heads a bit. So we want to be careful about that sort of thing. The Dead Sea, and again, so if we understand the geography of this, Sodom and Gomorrah were in that plain in the near vicinity of what is now the Dead Sea. And remember, when Lot went there, it was the well-watered plain. It was a beautiful place. You see any pictures from around there now, and it looks horrible. It looks uninhabitable. Again, I think there's a documented climate change that has occurred in that region. The Dead Sea is a Dead Sea because the water flows into it and it doesn't never leave. I think the Dead Sea is almost 1,000 feet below sea level, 900 and something feet below sea level. And the water from the Jordan River runs into there, but it never leaves. There's no outflow from the Dead Sea. And so everything that flows in there, all of the accumulated minerals, whatever erodes from the land over centuries has accumulated there, and it is a Dead Sea now. But it's not, because Lot's wife was turned into a pillar of salt. All right. Anything else? We got one more horrible episode to discuss about Lot. Let's skip to verse 30 here, chapter 19, verse 30. And Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountain, and his 2 daughters with him, for he feared to dwell in Zoar. And he dwelt in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. Oh, now he's wanting to go to the mountains. You know, he objected to go to the mountains now, but now he's going to the mountains because he's afraid to stay in the city. And the firstborn said unto the younger, Our father is old, and there is not a man in the earth to come in unto us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve seed of our father. And they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father, and he perceived not when she lay down or when she arose. And it came to pass on the morrow that the firstborn said unto the younger, Behold, I lay yesternight with my father. Let us make him drink wine this night also, and go thou in and lie with him, that we may preserve seed of our father. And they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger arose and lay with him, and he perceived not when she lay down or when she arose. Thus were both the daughters of Lot with child by their father. And the firstborn bare a son and called his name Moab, the same as the father of the Moabites to this day. And the younger, she also bare a son and called his name Ben-Ammi, the same as the father of the children of Ammon to this day. I don't know. Again, I'm almost left speechless and without explanation to this episode. I mean, what a horrible legacy for Lot. I mean, and so, you know, that's how the story ends. That's what we know of him, and that's just pathetic. I mean, all kinds of lessons learned, I'm sure. One is we could talk about the influence of alcohol, right? We see that here, but think about Lot. So he selfishly chose the well-watered plain. He pitched his tent toward Sodom. He went and lived in the city. He became a man of the city. He stayed when all the wickedness around him was vexing him constantly. He was torn up. He was well aware of what was going on, but he stayed. He didn't move his family out. Now he's fled the city. The city's been destroyed. All his material prosperity is gone. He's living like a hermit in a cave with his 2 daughters. His wife is dead. He's lost his wife. He's lost whatever other family he might have had in the city. He certainly lost all his material possessions. And now, this horrible incestuous situation with his 2 daughters ensues, and his miserable story ends on that note. I mean, what about Lot, Roger?
Well, I think it just shows how the city had affected the daughters.
Yes, this evil city. So what kind of daughters would have thought of a plan like that?
That's the first thing I thought of.
Yeah.
I mean, it
Yeah.
didn't have to think very long. I mean, so
Yeah.
they had these thoughts before.
I think that's a really good point. So, you know, how did this evil city wear off on his daughters? That they would come up with a scheme like this is how it wore off on them. Just terrible, horrible. And then, of course, the 2 nations that descended from these 2 children born of incest, the Moabites and the Ammonites. And the Moabites and the Ammonites were perpetual enemies of the Israelites thereafter, right? I mean, oh man, what a terrible story. Clayton.
Not justifying it, but isn't there a customary law that, like, if I died, my wife is supposed to go to my brother?
Your brother, but not your father.
Agreed. But I'm just thinking, in their skewed minds, maybe they're thinking about it more like that. Oh, he needs a son to pass on his legacy.
Well, and of course that regulation that you referenced was part of the law of Moses, which would have come along later, and it wasn't in force here. And actually, the law of Moses forbade this kind of incest. Tom?
For some reason, Lot didn't even consider some of the other options. Why didn't he return to Abraham? You know, this was Kendrick. You know, Abraham had helped him before, you know, had rescued him from
Yeah.
And it's like he turned his back, or was he so ashamed of what he went through that he just couldn't face Abraham? It's almost like he became a hermit, and even to the point where, you know, the thought that his daughter's there, there's not even another man around. Well, if he, you know, go out the mountain, go down the hill a little bit.
Find a man.
And Abraham's not that far away.
Abraham's not that far away. He's got a whole household of servants. Yeah, exactly.
And
He
they
never
just came from a city where I assumed there were other people. You would have thought, or that, at least that's what I've always thought, is that they allowed them to save alive that city that a lot of them were able to go into. So I've always thought, you would have thought they would have saw somebody there and know that it's not like the entire world got taken out.
Exactly right. And I think you're right. And to Tom's point, in verse 27, Abraham got up early in the morning in the place where he stood before the Lord, and he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain, and behold, and lo, the smoke of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace. So he was close enough to see the smoke from the city when the city was destroyed. So as you say, good point, Tom. Abraham's not that far away. Why don't you look to him for deliverance? Ellen?
So if my dad was to offer me to somebody that I didn't know, the next thing I would do is offer myself to the dad.
Yeah.
I mean, that thing is all boring.
That's the whole story. That's a good word. The whole story is warped. It's just crazy. But again, so what's Lot's last? We're just out of time. What's Lot's lasting legacy? He's a failure. He's just a failure. And you know, again, he is never held up as a hero of the faith because of all these horrible, just a chain wreck of a chain reaction or just compilation of bad decisions one after another. All right, thanks everybody for the good comments. We got a better character study next week. Joshua. Lord willing, we'll talk about Joshua next week. Thanks everybody.